good afternoon. My name is Esther van der Velde and I'm the Head of Ethics Affairs at the Research Office. And I have the pleasure in talking to you about research ethics compliance. So the first question is, why is it important, research ethics compliance? You can't hear me? Okay. This microphone is better? Yeah? Okay. It's important because respect for basic ethical principles is part of good scientific practice. So it's therefore obviously an institutional value for EPFL, and it is because respect for ethical values and principles leads to high quality research, and it protects also those that are involved in the research. Furthermore, it can be a legal obligation, so the compliance with ethics regulations can be required by law, and ethics authorization is in some cases a legal obligation. We see a number of trends. There is an increased attention for ethics in research. Funding bodies, for example, they would like to know what kind of ethical issues are involved in the research, how they are addressed, will the necessary ethics authorizations be obtained and when, and the funding will not be released will only be released unless ethical clearance has been obtained. This is the case for the EU and for SNSF. Also, editors, they ask for copies of ethics authorizations for publication purposes. The Ethics Affairs Unit at EPFL, we can provide support to researchers that have ethical issues in their research projects. We provide guidance and support on how and where to get an ethics authorization, which committee is competent. We do ethics compliance review of projects, have all the requirements been met, the authorizations requested or obtained. And we are the liaison with the Human Research Ethics Committee, and this is the institutional ethics committee at EPFL. In addition, we organize awareness-raising initiatives or workshops on ethics compliance issues. Now, ethics is a very broad concept, as you can see here. It involves projects that have human participants in either medical or non-medical research, projects that process and use biological material, projects with data protection issues because personal data is collected, and or those that involve animal experiments, environmental, and have an impact on the environment or on the health and safety of the researchers. So it's quite a broad concept, and the concept that we have accepted that corresponds basically with the definition that is used also by the big funding agencies. Ethics support can be provided during different phases of the life cycle of a project. In the pre-award phase, often an ethics self-assessment is requested, and we can do the proofreading of the ethics self-assessment. We can give guidance on how to address certain issues in this assessment, and help with the editing of it. In the award phase, the funding body performs an ethical screening of the project, and then it can happen that questions are submitted that need to be clarified. So Ethics Affairs can help to address these questions and help with the preparation of the formal reply to the funding body. The post-award phase is mainly focused on the collection of the authorizations. But also in the closeout phase, there can be ethics follow-up, like an ethics audit or an ethics check, or data storage questions and issues. We work a lot together with our colleagues in the VPA Legal Affairs, with the legal counsels, and also with the library for the data management issues. Now, for international research projects, it's important to know that there are different principles and guidelines that apply at different levels. For example, we have ethical principles that apply for research with humans and animals, and these can be considered global. For research with humans, there are three important principles, the founding principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And you can find them in basically in many legislations or regulations on research with humans, but internationally, worldwide. So respect for persons refers to the dignity and autonomy of the persons that participate in the research. Participants should be considered as autonomous agents that are very well capable of taking decisions on their personal matters. This links also to the concept of informed consent. And beneficence is the do no harm principle. So the researchers, they need to ensure the welfare and the well-being of the people that participate in the research, and that means that they have to do that by minimizing the risks that exist and maximizing the benefits. Justice relates to the concept of fairness, and this relates to decisions in the design of a trial that needs to be taken in a fair and equitable way, for example. Now, these are the founding principles, as I said, and you can find them in many regulations, but also when an ethics review does an evaluation of a research project, they will look at these principles. Ethical principles for research exist also for research that involve animals, and they are also internationally recognized. These are the 3 R principles for research involving animals, so replace, reduce, and refine. So replace is about finding alternative methods. Reduce relates to the fact that animal experiments should be reduced or with the less animals as possible. And refine relates to the principle that the minimum harm and strain must be suffered by the animals. Also, these principles, you find them back in legislation on animal protection internationally. Harmonization of ethics compliance standard is another example. There are many endeavors worldwide for clinical trials, for example. It's important that there is harmonization of standards of how they should be conducted. The International Council for Harmonization has developed the good clinical practice guidelines, which are recognized and adopted also internationally. And these provide really with an ethical and equality standard for how clinical trials should be conducted. And so these harmonization efforts are also very important from an international perspective. In addition to these more general principles, it's very important for researchers to keep in mind that the regulatory framework can vary a lot and is different from at the international and the national level. So it's always very important to check the national context. For example, in Switzerland, we have at the national level the Swiss federal law for research involving human beings, but also the Swiss data protection law. As an example for an international regulation, we can mention the EU data protection regulation. But in addition to the legislation that exists internationally and nationally, there may also be institutional requirements. At EPFL, for example, we have the EPFL Human Research Ethics Committee, and this is an example of an institutional committee. And the EPFL HREC reviews projects of EPFL researchers that involve human participants and or personal data. And this can, for example, be projects that involve interviews, observation of people, tracking, use of social media data. It can be, these are typical examples. Important to note is that these projects do not fall within the scope of the Human Research Act, so the national law for research involving human beings, because these projects are reviewed by the Cantonal Ethics Committee. We have another institutional review board at EPFL, which is the Animal Research Ethics Committee, the AREC. It's a relatively new committee. It exists since 2019. And this committee reviews projects conducted by EPFL researchers that involve animal experiments, but they are done abroad. So in addition to a review by the AREC, these projects also, of course, need the authorization from the competent local authority on animal research. Now, this map shows some examples. It shows also how ethics requirements always need to be decided on a case-by-case basis because it can be quite complex. This is just to show some examples. And a project that will be conducted by an EPFL researchers in Switzerland with human participants can either need an approval from the Cantonal Ethics Commission or from the HREC. A project that involves animal experiments that are done in, let's say, a European country like France, would need a review by the AREC, the Institutional Animal Research Ethics Committee, and also a local authorization. There can also be projects that involve the transfer of data between countries, and this is particularly important because also the local authorization is needed, but there might also be data transfer agreements needed. And so these are just some examples to show that on a case-by-case basis, it needs to be reviewed what is required in terms of ethics compliance and what are the authorizations that are needed. It's very difficult to give a very straightforward answer. I would like to conclude with some keep in mind messages. It's important to keep in mind that ethics is not an afterthought. It needs really to be an integral part of the project from the beginning. So this needs also to be included in the project planning, because the whole process to get an ethics authorization will require time and it needs to be planned in advance. Ethics will strengthen the research. It will lead to high quality research. The local regulatory context varies from country to country. It can be different. So it's important to check what are the funding body requirements. As I said, no ethical clearance, no release of funds, so it's very important. Check also the applicable legislation and the regulatory framework and which authorizations are needed and what are the competent ethics bodies to give them. And the timeline. The timeline to get an ethics authorization can be long, so this also needs to be included in the planning of the project, and it's important to start well in advance. If you want to know more about these issues, then I invite you to take the e-course that was developed last year, Conducting Research the Right Way. It tells you more about how to promote research integrity and good scientific practice at EPFL. It's very much based on the law and on the Lex 332. You can find the course on the learning platform of EPFL. And I would like to finish the presentation with this quote that underlines the importance of respecting ethics also in international research. Thank you very much.